Last week, I made some pretty big claims about our Christian faith. I claimed that Jesus lays the foundation for our faith with his greatest commandment, and I argued that much of the modern church perhaps doesn't do that great commandment as well as we think they should. Love God, love neighbor. Or perhaps their interpretations of that commandment fall short of what I believe to be a more accurate reading of these words. So today we're moving forward in our exploration of how the modern practice of Christianity came to be and this church's place within that practice. Today, as you've heard, we're exploring devotion, the love of God, and how this primary aspect of our faith drives much of the teachings that have come down to us through the ages. Devotion to the Holy One comes in many forms, including what we're doing right now. The singing of hymns, prayers, our banners, lit candles. We do many things that show devotion and love of God. Some take their devotion even further, too far, arguably, in some cases. The term zealot is spot on in describing some with a more than normal amount of affection for the deity. In the early years of the church, some were driven by this immense love of the Creator to go so far as to not only renounce their worldly possessions, but also then to separate themselves from the rest of the secular world. And in the first century world, this was easily accomplished by packing your bags and moving to the desert. These hermits eschewed everything that living in community had to offer. They thought that they could better show their devotion to God and their commitment to the way of Jesus by saying goodbye to their old way of life and setting up a new life in the middle of a barren desert. One problem, for generations, these hermits actually attracted acolytes, others who wished to learn the way of their asceticism. So listen to this sentence. Large communities of hermits developed out in the desert sands. It reminds me of a comment that a friend of mine always makes about the River Festival. She always says, well, more people would come to the River Festival if it were less crowded. So once again, the religious leaders of the day then are faced with this need to provide rules and regulations concerning the daily life of all these people. You know, in the large urban areas, local governments were in place, or more often than not, the occupying force provided you with a local government, but they were there to maintain order. And now we have all of these hermits faced with the one thing that they were trying to escape: other people. And there was no one to organize and enforce order but those very hermits who were fleeing the masses. It's a fascinating time in my mind for this kind of history. This time period in the early history of the Christ-following Jews is called the patristic era. Patristic meaning the fathers, the church fathers. I call it both the church mothers and church fathers period because of all of the new scholarship that has arisen. And it is in these monastic communities that elaborate rules and rituals were developed to maintain a particular type of order in the community. And we do call that, even to today, monastic order. And this is an order that had at its hierarchical acme, at the very top, the Holy One, who then shared the Holy One's desires and wishes and commandments to the head of the monastic order, and things then all flowed downhill. However, significant theological and philosophical work was taking place in these religious centers. We know that they would also then grow to play an essential role in protecting wisdom and knowledge when the Roman Empire begins its long, slow slog into ruin. We cannot forget that the reason almost any of the knowledge of this time in history survived the Dark Ages was because these monasteries became repositories for knowledge and for wisdom, and they protected it fiercely during Rome's fall. Okay, a lot of history packed in those paragraphs. The church mothers and fathers loved God and the way of Jesus so much that they felt like they needed to sell everything they owned, leave the city, and move to the desert to contemplate their souls. They felt that abolishing the distractions of modern life would allow them clarity and focus, the clarity and focus that they lacked to better understand their lives. They left behind the baggage to meet the demands of God, even if that demand was interpreted as giving up your life in the service of the Messiah. So we can't forget, Rome had not so much declared Christianity illegal during this period as Rome made it extremely difficult for anyone to practice the new religion. The Roman leaders maneuvered it so that if you failed to participate in the Roman civic religion, if you failed to belong to one of the temples of Demeter or Dionysus or Apollo, your neighborhood temple, if you did not do that, you were at risk of imprisonment and possible execution in the arena, unless you recanted your new faith as a follower of Christ, and then you paid tribute and homage to one of their civic gods. Rome didn't care if you did both, but you had to at least do the civic piece. New followers of the faith, though, were very enthusiastic about their religion, so much so that martyrdom was seen as a worthy alternative practice. I couldn't go through a sermon series on church history without spending a little time with the church fathers, the church mothers, and the church martyrs. Our faith has a long history of creating and sustaining martyrs, people who love God so much and are so devoted to the way of Jesus that they would sacrifice their lives in what they believe to be service to Christ. From history, we have some names. Perpetua and Felicity are two such martyrs. Their story survives because Perpetua actually kept a detailed diary of her trial at the hands of the Romans. Perpetua began her diary with an account of her imprisonment. She continues in it with descriptions of the various trials and her father's impassioned but fruitless pleas for her to renounce her Christian identity. All she had to do to go free was recant her new faith. And her father, you can imagine the father begging his daughter, "It's all you got to do, just recant it." And she wouldn't do it. Most of Perpetua's text concerns these dreams that she was having while in prison. She believed these dreams were gifts from God. They were prophecies. They offered her visions of her upcoming entry into heaven. She had dreams of her beloved deceased younger brother. She had dreams about her upcoming ordeal in the arena. On the evening before her scheduled death, Perpetua gave her diary to another Christian with them, and he then continued the story of the martyrdom of Perpetua and the other Christians. He described how one of Perpetua's companions, the pregnant slave Felicity, gave birth while in prison. And he also wrote of the young Christians' bravery in the arena, where they were attacked by wild beasts, but not killed. And finally, Perpetua voluntarily accepts death by sword from one of the centurions. On April 20, 1999, a shooting occurred at Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado. Among the 15 fatalities, which included the death by suicide of both gunmen, was a young girl named Cassie Bernal. You might recall her name because of the famous story that has grown up around her death. While the killers were stalking their victims through the school, they would ask them if they believed in God. If the students said no, the killers left them alone. When one of the killers discovered Cassie hiding under a desk, he mockingly asked her if she believed in God. And Cassie reportedly said yes, and the boy then shot and killed her. Cassie's story, which became condensed as the slogan, "She said yes," caused an enormous response from the public. Cassie was almost immediately declared a martyr in the press, and it is reported that her death sparked a new wave of evangelism among teenagers. No one would have denied this young girl, and no one would have judged her if she had said no. I honestly, too, think God would have understood. A young person giving up their life out of a devout, fervent faith. But that ending would not have served the needs of the martyrdom narrative. So she said yes. These passionate and dramatic stories attract people to the faith, including many young people. Stories like that of Perpetua and her pregnant friend Felicity, and yes, even stories of Cassie Bernal. Because the doctrine, the teaching goes like this: if Jesus could give his life to save humanity, then what is it for you to give up your life in your devotion of God? I am always puzzled at how the crucifixion became the focus of the faith, instead of the teachings of mercy, compassion, and love. I read the gospel as a life-affirming thing. And these early zealots read the same documents and determined for them that death was actually the preferred way of showing devotion. And this was an accepted practice for centuries, an accepted interpretation, and it's accepted because it is the logical progression of one of Jesus' most perplexing teachings. And the teaching is this: what we honestly must do to eradicate poverty. Now follow me here. In Matthew 19, we get the story of Jesus and the rich young ruler who has just asked Jesus what he, the rich young ruler, must do to get into the kingdom of heaven. And Jesus said to him, "If you wish to be perfect, go, sell your possessions and give the money to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come, follow me." Then come, follow me. When the young man heard this word, he went away grieving, for he had many possessions. Yeah, who among us would not grieve such a commandment? What if we held all of Christendom up to that standard for determining your worth as a Christian? For some reason, I just don't think it would fly. But the logical progression of giving up possessions would end with one realizing that after selling everything you own and getting rid of the closet full of shoes and all of the artwork or whatever, and liquidating your Bitcoin, after you've done all of that, all you would have to offer is your flesh, your body, your very life. You can begin to see how a zealot or a fanatic, or whatever word we want to give them, but you can see how they might conclude that their death is just part of the sacrifice. Now, I think it speaks more to the degradation of the individual life that Rome had accomplished, and that the church continued with its early teachings. This idea of following Jesus, come, follow me, was actually new and radical. It did take root, and many early Christians did indeed sell everything they had. They gave it away, and they then joined these other small communities that were popping up in the region. The communities were developing around the teachings of various disciples. And from these communities, then we end up with 4 Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. There were more communities and there were more Gospels. But we have the surviving documents that these faith communities used early on in being together in life together. So this idea of come follow me was very new. But then, think about this. Okay, you have this ancient practice of Judaism. This is in context. You have this ancient practice of Judaism. It's passed down through generations. It is a solid faith that has served your community very well for centuries. It is a faith anchored by covenants with Yahweh. And here come these new followers of Jesus who are putting flies in the ointment, who are making changes to the very basis of the faith. You can imagine the anger and the frustration the temple authorities felt. The anger the average Jewish person on the street probably felt, because families were being torn apart. Brother was being set against brother, father against daughter, neighbor against neighbor. The first few centuries of this new faith were chaotic and disorganized. And I can understand and sympathize with the old guard. The new followers of Jesus were liberals, and they were countercultural. And by the way, Christianity has always been liberal and countercultural, and it always should be liberal and countercultural. The very heart of the gospel is to do things God's way, not Rome's way, not Topeka's way, not DC's way, not City Hall's way, not even mine and Robin's way, to do it God's way. The new followers of Jesus were revolutionary and progressive. They were the liberals of the first century Palestine. Diana Butler Bass writes this: progressive faith, then, is not about winning. When progressivism becomes hubris, it always fails. Instead, ancient tradition, deeply formed in the ideals of spiritual progress, insists that the progressive faith is about humility. Our lives and this world transformed through God's beauty. Of course, that doesn't fit on a bumper sticker or work very well in a party platform, but it should give all of us pause, always remembering progress is a journey, not a destination. And I like to say, while we're on our journey, we sometimes find pleasant company to travel with us, like-minded folks who work to love God and to love neighbor. The benefits of us traveling together as a community are many, but Albert Schweitzer hits on a very nice benefit when he writes this: at times, our own light goes out and is rekindled by a spark from another person. Each of us has cause to think with deep gratitude of those who have lighted the flame within us. How many times have you had your own spark of life reignited by someone whose generosity or act of kindness actually made you feel the warmth of something? Something was connected and triggered by this person. Or, how many times have you been the ember that coaxes someone else's fire back to life? As Emily reminded the children, pray for yourself and remember, you light other fires. Speaking of Albert Schweitzer, like you do, actually, Jim Radigan should be here. That's one of his favorite authors to talk about with me is Albert Schweitzer. But last week I spoke about how Schweitzer had written a book, The Search for the Historical Jesus, and how that book sparked a new wave in religious studies and profound biblical scholarship and research. You got to remember, this type of biblical research is relatively new to the world. The church kept tabs on how biblical scholarship occurred for most of the preceding 2,000 years. So it's been very difficult to get at objective truth. What we've uncovered, though, is this: the Bible was arranged in such a way as to ensure that the power of the church can maintain spiritual dominion on earth. The only way to God or to Christ was through the church and its compliant priests and monks and nuns and deacons. The Protestant way of Jesus is devoted to God through a direct connection with the Holy One, not an intervention of a priest or a saint. Protestants believe that anyone can connect with God at any time and anywhere. That was a pretty big plank in our defining thesis there. When I taught, I always used a metaphor of hiking or sightseeing for my underlying teaching philosophy. I knew the way through the forest of our subject, whatever lesson we were in. And I could accompany my learners on this journey of discovery through our subject. I was their tour guide. It's the way I looked at it. I might know a shortcut through the difficult information here, or maybe this aspect of our subject is really cool and we should spend a little extra time sightseeing over here. Sometimes my students would wander off the trail of the lesson, and as long as they weren't heading into a dangerous part of the woods, I'd let them. The best kind of learning is that which happens spontaneously, even in the middle of a well-planned lesson. The theological work that I do for you here, that Robin does, is very similar. We know much about these things, as do many of you, and we see a path through the woods. And we've been down some of these trails before. Sometimes, though, some of you have a really neat insight, and you show us a new vista that we might have missed if we'd simply gone the way we always went before. A modern practice, then, of Christianity might have all of us as priests. It might have all of us interpreting Scripture. It might have all of us upholding the sacredness of the Holy One. Christianity must be more than a rule book. The faith must be more than a weapon to use against other people. And it must be more than just a useful map to assist us through this forest of life. Christianity points us in the right direction with love of God and love of neighbor as our target. Whether or not we hit the mark and achieve our goal, that's up to us. How will you love God and neighbor this week? How will you honor Perpetua, Felicity's baby? Yes, even Cassie Bernal. How will you keep the memory of the church mothers, the church fathers who went on ahead and make up that vast cloud of witnesses? How will you be a Christian in the world today? Whose light will you rekindle? Amen.